Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Kalira Vaughn, the undisputed queen of Grafton, paused in front of the general store and looked down at the silent Apache man. Her lips curled with disdain as she flicked a coin into the dust. "This town doesn't need your kind," she said coldly. Seconds later, everything changed. She stumbled backward, breath torn from her chest. No, God, no. The man she had mocked, quiet, unreadable, dangerous, slowly rose to his feet. Something ancient and lethal awakened behind his eyes. What followed would burn his name into the desert forever. On a scorching afternoon, as Kalira Vaughn stepped down from her polished carriage, sunlight flashed across the varnished wood like fire on steel. Her gaze, accustomed to ruling everything it touched, stopped on a lone figure sitting beneath the sagging wooden awning of the general store. He was an Apache man in his early 30s. His clothes were worn, faded by sun and sand, yet his body carried the quiet tension of restrained power rather than poverty. He did not move. His eyes were fixed on the horizon where dust met sky. To Kalira Vaughn, sheltered in wealth and arrogance, that stillness looked like weakness. To her, he was nothing more than a drifter, a blemish on the town she believed she owned. She let out a short laugh, sharp and cutting. From her purse, she drew a silver coin and tossed it at his feet. The metallic sound hitting dry earth froze the street. "This town would look better without your kind in it," she said, her voice firm with certainty. Her words lingered in the air, heavy with privilege and casual cruelty. What Kalira Vaughn did not understand was the silence around her. The people of Grafton did not laugh. They did not speak. They did not move. Every man, woman, and child in that town knew the truth she did not. His silence was not submission. It was control. He was not a vagrant. He was ORU. In the frontier, that name carried weight. A former scout, a living shadow of the desert. A man whispered about in saloons and feared in the wilderness. Without exaggeration, he was the most dangerous man in the territory. A truth Kalira Vaughn had just ignored, fatally. The coin shimmered in the dust. ORU did not react. He did not blink. His dark eyes remained locked on the distant line where desert met sky. Eyes that had seen violence, justice, and death in ways no heiress could imagine. The town held its breath. They knew. They understood that the woman who believed herself untouchable had just insulted the only force that kept chaos from swallowing Grafton whole. Her empire, built on money and arrogance, was about to face a test it could not buy its way out of. As the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the western sky in deep orange and bruised purple, a low rumble began to rise from the earth. Hooves. Many hooves. In the wild frontier, that sound never meant peace. Kalira Vaughn, still wrapped in her pride, felt a tremor, not in the ground, but in her confidence. The townspeople exchanged terrified glances, their eyes shifting between the growing dust cloud and the unmoving figure of ORU. A shadow darker than gold was approaching. The rumble exploded into thunder. Hooves and voices ripped through the fragile quiet of Grafton. As the last light vanished behind the hills, the main street fell into a twilight born not of nature, but of fear. Dust erupted as horses charged into town, swallowing the sunset in a choking cloud. The air turned sharp, heavy with the scent of danger. Out of the haze rode Drevin Cole and his ruthless men, outlaws whose name was spoken in whispers across the territory. Drevin Cole, scarred and smiling like a predator, led the charge. His men spread through the street, their shouts bouncing off wooden walls like war drums. Everyone knew their target, the vault of the Vaughn family, the symbol of Kalira Vaughn's power, the heart of her empire. Grafton erupted into chaos. Women screamed, children cried, men ran for cover. The illusion of safety shattered in seconds. The guards who had once strutted through town fled at the first gunshot, their courage dissolving into fear. They disappeared into alleys and saloons, leaving Kalira Vaughn and the townspeople exposed. Moments earlier, she had been untouchable. Now she stood in the center of the storm she had unknowingly created. Her silk dress tangled around her legs as she stumbled across the uneven street. Gunfire cracked through the air, hooves thundered past her, voices screamed from every direction. She was no longer the queen of Grafton. She was just a woman, terrified, cornered, helpless. And the desert was about to decide her fate. Her guards had vanished. Her fortune, once her ultimate shield, proved worthless against the savage language of iron and fire. Kalira Vaughn dropped to her knees, dust clinging to the silk of her gown, her trembling hands clasped together as if instinctively searching for mercy. Her pleas did not rise toward the sky. They were directed at the men whose faces now twisted with cruel satisfaction. "Please, stop!" Her voice broke. The air thickened with the acrid stench of gunpowder. Lanterns flared to life in hurried hands, their flickering light stretching shadows into grotesque shapes that crawled across walls and faces. For Kalira Vaughn, the world collapsed into a suffocating circle of terror. Every scream, every gunshot, every mocking laugh drove the truth deeper into her soul. Her wealth, her bloodline, her power. None of it mattered now. She was exposed, fragile, the very embodiment of the weakness she had once despised in others. Her empire was not falling with elegance or dignity. It was tearing apart, violently, thread by thread. And then, within the chaos, something shifted. A shadow moved. Oru, who had stood motionless like carved stone, finally rose. His movement was not hurried, not emotional. It was deliberate, slow, controlled, terrifyingly calm. It was the rise of something inevitable, like the turning of the earth or the approach of a storm. The townspeople, hiding behind barrels and doorways, saw him. Their fear of the outlaws faded, replaced by something deeper, something colder. A fear mixed with desperate hope. They knew what this meant. They had heard stories. They had witnessed fragments of his past. He walked forward, not running, not shouting, toward the heart of danger, toward the very violence everyone else fled. There was no speech, no dramatic gesture, only the precise stillness of a warrior stepping into his purpose. His silhouette, framed by the burning wreckage of an overturned wagon, seemed to expand, swallowing the dying light. With each measured step, the air around him felt heavier, as if the world itself recognized what was coming. He crossed from shadow into fire. The first outlaw noticed him. A massive man with a pistol in hand turned toward the approaching Apache, his sneer faltering. Confusion flashed across his face, followed by recognition, and then horror. He understood. They had all made a mistake. ORU, the desert shadow, had stepped into the open, and Grafton was about to pay for its ignorance. The dance of death began. Its rhythm belonged to him. The outlaw, Torin Blay, infamous for brute strength and merciless cruelty, raised his pistol with a slow grin. To him, this was just another obstacle, a lone Apache in his way. But before his finger touched the trigger, something moved faster than sight. In a blur of motion, his weapon vanished from his hand, spinning through the air before crashing into the dust. Before Torrin Blay could even react, a precise strike shattered his balance. He collapsed, unconscious before his body hit the ground. The general store, once a place of stillness, became the stage of awakening. The other members of the Coal Wolves froze. Their drunken laughter died in their throats. Silence spread through them like poison as they watched one of their most feared men fall without resistance. This was no ordinary town, and this was no ordinary man. Their eyes shifted nervously. Greed turned to doubt. Confidence cracked into fear. Still kneeling in the dust, Kalira Vaughn watched. Her body trembled. The sudden quiet, broken only by distant flames and ragged breathing, felt more terrifying than the chaos before. Her gaze locked onto ORU, the man she had mocked, the man she had dismissed as worthless. Now she saw something else entirely. Not a drifter, not a beggar. A force. ORU did not speak. His language was movement. He flowed through shadow and fire like a phantom. An outlaw trying to flank him lost his rifle in an instant, his body hurled backward into another man. Another attacker lunged with a knife, only to have his wrist twisted with bone-crushing precision, the blade dropping uselessly from numb fingers. His movements were ruthless, efficient, devastating. He turned barrels into shields, wagon wheels into weapons, chaos into advantage. Every strike was calculated. Every step was controlled. Every breath carried the weight of countless battles fought in silence. At the far end of the street, astride his horse, Drevin Cole watched. His eyes narrowed. He had heard the whispers. He had dismissed the legends. But now, as he watched ORU move through his men with inhuman precision, he understood something he had never expected to face. The stories were real, and the desert shadow had awakened. He had once laughed at those stories, dismissing them as exaggerated campfire myths told by frightened men. But as he watched this warrior move, a cold realization tightened in his chest. This was no legend. This was reality. Drevin Cole shouted orders, his voice raw with urgency, commanding his remaining men to surround the Apache, to overwhelm him with numbers. But fear had already taken root inside the Coal Wolves, spreading faster than gunfire. As ORU disarmed another outlaw, snapping a rifle stock with brutal precision, Kalira Vaughn found herself staring not at a man, but at something far greater. The memory of her cruel words, the coin she had tossed at his feet, burned inside her with unbearable shame. She had judged him by his silence, his worn clothes, his skin. And in doing so, she had revealed the depth of her own blindness. The truth was not only about his strength, it was about her ignorance. A bullet sliced through the chaos, grazing ORU's arm. He did not flinch. His focus never wavered. His eyes remained steady, dark and reflective, like polished stone amid violence. He moved in patterns that were impossible to predict, never linear, never careless. Every step disrupted the rhythm of his enemies. He understood their tactics, their instincts, their fear. He had hunted men like Drevin Cole for years. His survival had been forged in deserts where mercy did not exist. Then something unexpected happened. A young boy, no older than 10, burst from behind an overturned wagon, sprinting toward the general store where his mother was trapped. One outlaw noticed him and lifted his gun, a cruel smile twisting his face. Oru saw it instantly. Without hesitation, he abandoned his current fight. For the first time, something raw crossed his expression. Something protective. In a blur of motion, he stepped between the child and the outlaw. The shot hit his shoulder. His body jolted, but he did not fall. With a single decisive strike, he incapacitated the attacker, then guided the terrified boy toward safety with a firm but gentle push. The townspeople watched in stunned silence. Even the outlaws hesitated. In that moment, they understood something deeper. This was not about money, not about revenge, not even about pride. This was about a code, older than the town, older than the law. Watching him, Kalira Vaughn felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not hatred. Something far more unsettling. Respect. The man she had tried to diminish was rising with every selfless act, becoming something beyond human in her eyes. From horseback, Drevin Cole watched his men fall one by one. Fury burned in his gaze, but beneath it lay something unexpected. Respect. He knew now that he had miscalculated. This was no simple raid. This was war, and he was losing. A sudden realization struck him like ice. If he continued, he would die here. But he would not retreat without one final move. He raised his pistol, not toward ORU, toward Kalira Vaughn. "Drop it, Apache," Drevin Cole snarled, his voice hoarse with rage. "Or she dies." The air froze. Smoke hung heavy above the street. His pistol was pressed toward Kalira Vaughn's head. Dust streaked her face, her eyes wide with terror. The balance had shifted. Now ORU faced a choice. His life, or hers. Silence spread across Grafton. Every gaze, townspeople, outlaws, survivors, locked onto ORU. This was the moment that would define him. His face remained calm, carved from restraint. But his eyes moved, calculating, measuring, weighing possibilities. The wound in his shoulder burned, a reminder of the bullet meant for the child. It did not slow him. He knew what Drevin Cole was capable of. He knew the heiress, flawed as she was, did not deserve death. To abandon her would mean betraying a law older than revenge. Slowly, deliberately, Oru lowered his hands. The knife slipped from his fingers and struck the dust. The sound echoed. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Had the desert shadow surrendered? A twisted smile crept across Drevin Cole's scarred face. Victory flickered in his eyes. But Oru's gaze held no defeat, only something far more dangerous. Resolve. He lifted his hands higher, slowly, deliberately, not in surrender, but in a movement that drew Drevin Cole's full attention. For a brief moment, the outlaw's focus shifted from Kalira Vaughn to the Apache. And in that instant, the desert held its breath. It was a deadly error. In the microscopic instant between Drevin Cole's arrogant confidence and his delayed realization, ORU moved. Not with reckless aggression, not with a wild charge, but with emotion so precise it seemed almost unreal. His body shifted with coiled tension, then released, a streak of movement too fast for ordinary eyes to track. He did not reach for a weapon. He became one. His hands, still raised as if in surrender, flicked with subtle force. A tiny stone, barely noticeable in the dust beneath his boots, shot forward with terrifying velocity. The pebble tore through the air and slammed into Drevin Cole's hand with the impact of a fired round. A sharp cry escaped the outlaw leader. His fingers spasmed. The pistol jerked upward and fired uselessly into the night sky. In the same breath, Oru closed the distance. He did not strike wildly. He moved with disciplined precision, guided by knowledge rather than rage. His hand struck Drevin Cole's forearm at a calculated point, sending a brutal shock through the outlaw's arm and forcing the weapon to fall. Drevin Cole roared, fury and pain tearing from his throat as the gun hit the dirt. Before he could recover, Oru unleashed a series of rapid, targeted blows. Each strike landed with surgical accuracy, dismantling the outlaw's ability to fight back. The once dominant leader collapsed from his horse, hitting the ground with a heavy, lifeless crash. The battle drained from him in seconds. The remaining members of the Coal Wolves, witnessing the impossible fall of their leader, felt their courage evaporate. Their eyes widened with primal fear. The truth was undeniable. Their feared commander had been defeated by nothing more than a stone and a man's bare hands. Humiliation spread through them like fire. With broken resolve, they turned their horses and fled, disappearing into the merciless darkness from which they had come. Their silhouettes dissolved into the night. Silence fell over Grafton. Only the ragged breathing of Kalira Vong and the slow, deliberate footsteps of ORU remained as he retrieved his bowie knife from the dust. The violence had ended as suddenly as it began, leaving behind smoke, shattered pride, and the heavy weight of something that felt like fate. Still kneeling, Kalira Vaughn stared at ORU, her mind struggling to reconcile the man she had mocked with the warrior who had just dismantled an entire gang. Her arrogance had collapsed, replaced by an overwhelming awareness of her own fragility and his immense, silent strength. He had not only saved her life, he had done so with intelligence, restraint, and a mastery that surpassed brute force. The quiet Apache she had dismissed had revealed a depth of power she had never imagined existed. The world she believed in, a world ruled by money, had shattered. Dust slowly settled over Grafton. The echo of gunshots faded into an uneasy stillness, broken only by distant hoofbeats and the shaken breaths of townspeople emerging from hiding. Kalira Vaughn remained on the ground, her elegant dress stained with dirt, her face streaked with tears and ash, her heart still pounding violently in her chest. The image of Drevin Cole's pistol aimed at her head burned in her memory. Yet even stronger was the vision of ORU, moving with impossible speed, deflecting death with a simple stone. One act she could never forget. The townsfolk approached cautiously, their expressions filled with awe and unease. They had always known ORU's reputation, but witnessing his power firsthand was something entirely different. He stood amid the wreckage, his shoulder bleeding, Drevin Cole unconscious at his feet, his posture calm and unshaken, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. There was no triumph in him, no boast, only quiet resolve. Slowly, Kalira Vaughn forced herself to stand. Relief washed over her, followed instantly by shame so deep it made her chest ache. The man she had humiliated had just placed himself between her and death. He had taken a bullet meant for a child. He had faced a ruthless outlaw with nothing but discipline and will. Her carefully constructed world, built on wealth and status, had collapsed in less than an hour. Power, she realized with a painful clarity, was not measured in gold, but in courage and principle. As ORU bent to pick up his knife, his movements still fluid despite the wound, Kalira Vaughn finally found her voice. "Thank you," she whispered. The words felt foreign on her tongue. ORU gave a slight nod. His dark eyes met hers for a brief moment. There was no judgment in his gaze, no pride, only a quiet understanding, an acknowledgement of fear, humanity, and duty. Then he turned away, scanning the street, ensuring the danger had truly passed. And in that moment, Kalira Vaughn understood something she had never known before. The desert did not bow to wealth. It bowed only to those who deserved it. The remaining outlaws who could still move were already disappearing into the darkness, their fear driving them faster than pride ever had. Oru drew in a slow, steady breath, as if peeling himself away from the violence that had just consumed the street. The fury that had guided him moments earlier faded from his posture, replaced by a calm stillness that felt almost unreal. He knelt beside Drevin Cole, his movements swift and deliberate. From a nearby hitching post, he pulled a length of rope and bound the outlaw leader's wrists and ankles with practiced efficiency, making certain there would be no escape when consciousness returned. As he tightened the final knot, something caught his attention. A small object rested in Drevin Cole's unconscious hand. It was a wooden bird, no larger than a thumb, carved with delicate precision. It looked strangely out of place in the grip of a man whose life had been shaped by violence and greed. It was not the sort of thing an outlaw would carry into a raid, nor something he would risk losing in the chaos of battle. Carefully, you pried the carving from Drevin Cole's fingers. The moment his hand closed around the smooth, worn wood, a subtle shock rippled through him. Recognition stirred, quiet but undeniable. He knew this carving. It was an Apache symbol of peace, crafted in a style rarely seen anymore. A relic from an older time, when tribes still spoke of unity rather than survival. But there was something more. The tail feathers bore a distinctive knot, a signature. It was identical to the carvings made by Koro, his grandfather, a design passed down through his family, unique and unmistakable. This was not a random trinket. It was a fragment of his own heritage. As ORU studied the wooden bird, a chill ran through him, unrelated to the night air. The realization struck with crushing force. Drevin Cole was not just another outlaw. He was his brother. Years ago, his parents had brought twin sons into the world. One had grown within the traditions of his people, learning the ways of the desert and the discipline of a warrior. The other had been stolen during a raid in infancy, taken by settlers, believed lost forever. That lost child had not vanished. He had returned, and he had become the very kind of man ORU had spent his life hunting. What had seemed like a random attack on Grafton was something far darker, a violent collision of blood separated by fate and time. The deepest wound of ORU's life had resurfaced, not as memory, but as an enemy lying bound at his feet. A flicker of shock crossed his face, quickly buried beneath control. The man he had defeated was not merely an outlaw. He was family. The bravery that had fueled his actions moments earlier now carried a weight that felt unbearable. He had stopped a threat, but he had also struck down his own flesh and blood. Nearby, Kalira Vaughn noticed the subtle change in him. His expression tightened for just an instant, a shadow of emotion she could not name, yet she felt it. The silent protector had become something else, a man wrestling with a storm no one else could see. As townspeople slowly emerged from hiding, their voices filled with gratitude and awe, ORU did not look at them. His gaze remained fixed on the wooden bird in his hand, distant and haunted. He had saved Grafton, but the cost was immeasurable. The cheers and hesitant praise faded into emptiness as he stared at the carving, a silent proof of a destiny far more tragic than anyone present could imagine. His greatest victory had delivered his deepest wound. In the aftermath of the raid, Grafton hovered between disbelief and relief. People stepped cautiously into the street, whispering about the impossible feats they had witnessed. In a single hour, ORU had become more than the town's quiet guardian. He had become legend. Yet he stood apart from the celebration. His mind was far away, the wooden bird heavy in his hand, a truth too painful to speak aloud. Kalira Vaughn, however, no longer viewed him from a distance. The terror she had felt on the street had shattered her arrogance, leaving her exposed in ways she had never experienced. She noticed the blood soaking through his shirt, the wound in his shoulder, and something unfamiliar stirred inside her. "You're hurt," she said quietly. Her voice was softer than anyone in Grafton had ever heard it. She stepped toward him, not with authority, but with hesitant care. ORU nodded once. Though his gaze remained distant, he did not pull away as she examined the injury. It was a silent moment, a fragile bridge between two worlds that had collided in violence. She saw the raw wound, the clean puncture, and felt a shiver. "Come with me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You need proper treatment." It was not a request. It was an order. But this time, it was born of concern, not pride. And so, for the first time, ORU, the Apache scout, crossed the threshold of the Vaughn estate. Inside, the contrast was stark. Plush carpets replaced dust, crystal chandeliers glowed where only stars usually shone, and the scent of perfume mingled with the lingering smell of gunpowder on his clothes. Kalira Vaughn, moving with urgent purpose, directed her uneasy servants to bring warm water, clean cloth, and medicine. Two worlds stood face to face under one roof, and neither would ever be the same again. She silenced the questioning looks of the servants with a sharp glance, her attention fixed entirely on the wounded man. As she cleaned his injury, her movements careful and unexpectedly gentle, a quiet stillness settled between them. The tension that had once separated them, born of pride, prejudice, and cruelty, began to fade, replaced by something fragile yet real. ORU watched her closely. His dark eyes followed every motion, not with suspicion, but with calm, measured curiosity. She, in turn, found herself drawn to his presence, the restrained strength that surrounded him even in pain. She noticed the faint lines around his eyes, the scars on his hands, silent records of a life far removed from the sheltered luxury of Grafton. After a long moment, she spoke. "I behaved terribly earlier," Kalira Vaughn said softly, her voice barely audible as she focused on the wound beneath her fingers. "I judged you without understanding. I was wrong." The confession was raw, stripped of pride. With those words, the carefully constructed mask she had worn for years began to crack. ORU listened without interruption. His expression remained calm, yet his posture shifted slightly, his shoulders easing as if he had truly heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, unexpectedly gentle. "We all wear masks," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "Some for protection, some for power, some for fear." His words were not forgiveness nor accusation. They were truth. He spoke of his life in fragments, not heroic tales, but quiet reflections of desert winds, endless tracks in the sand, the weight of the sky above him, and the bond his people shared with the land. He spoke of survival, of silence, of a world where meaning was measured not in gold, but in endurance. Kalira Vaughn listened. For the first time in her life, she truly listened. She felt herself pulled into a world she had never known, a world where worth was not inherited, but earned. As hours passed and the first light of dawn brushed the horizon, something new formed between them. It was not love, not yet, but something deeper. Respect. He was wilderness. Uncontrolled, honest, unforgiving. She was civilization, polished, fragile, uncertain. Yet in that quiet room, amid blood and bandages, they found a shared ground. Then came the revelation. As Kalira Vaughn secured a fresh bandage around ORU's shoulder, her gaze drifted toward the small wooden bird resting on the nearby table. Her breath caught. She lifted it slowly, her fingers tracing the intricate knot in its tail. "This carving," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's identical to one my father kept." Dalton Vaughn had told her it belonged to his adopted son, a boy stolen during a raid as an infant, later found and raised as his own. My half-brother, she said quietly. ORU's eyes widened. In that instant, the truth struck with devastating clarity. Drevin Cole was not only his lost twin, he was also Kalira Vaughn's half-brother. Their bloodlines had been entwined long before the raid, before the insults, before the violence. Fate had bound them together in ways neither had imagined. The attack on Grafton was not random. It was the violent eruption of a buried family tragedy. The silence between them grew heavy, filled with meanings too vast for words. Then it shattered. A violent pounding struck the front door, echoing through the mansion. A frantic voice cried out from beyond the threshold. "Miss Vaughn! Sheriff's here! They're back! Another gang! The livery stable's on fire!" The fragile peace collapsed instantly. A new wave of terror surged through Grafton. The pounding continued, urgent, relentless. The revelation that had just transformed their world was torn apart by reality. A new gang, perhaps allies, perhaps rivals, had arrived, announcing themselves with flames and destruction. The calm vanished. ORU, his shoulder still burning with pain, moved without hesitation. The knowledge of Drevin Cole's identity weighed heavily on him, but he did not allow it to slow his resolve. He secured his knife, his face once again hardening into quiet determination. Kalira Vaughn watched him, fear and concern tightening her expression. "You're still wounded," she said urgently. "You can't face them again alone." ORU met her gaze, his eyes unwavering. "Grafton is my home," he said quietly. "And now it's yours." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of an oath. "I protect what is mine." He did not speak of bloodlines. Not yet. Outside, flames climbed higher into the dawn sky, and Grafton prepared to bleed once more. There was no time left for revelations while flames devoured the town and screams tore through the morning air. Truth could wait. Survival could not. As they stepped into the street, Grafton was once again swallowed by terror. Thick smoke poured from the burning livery stable, its fire clawing toward the pale dawn, casting a harsh orange glow across the frightened faces of the townspeople. This new force was not chaos. It was precision. The gang moved with cold discipline, striking key points, sealing exits, herding fear like cattle. Their goal was not theft. It was domination. At their center rode Niall Cross, a woman whose presence commanded dread. Her gaze was hard, her hands steady, her twin pistols flashing beneath the flicker of firelight. A long leather coat flowed behind her as she guided her black mare through the chaos, her voice slicing through the air like a whip. She had heard rumors of a desert phantom, a silent Apache warrior, but she had laughed at them. No man, she believed, could stand against her riders, but ORU had no intention of standing alone. While the townspeople froze in fear, he moved. Not toward open battle, but through shadow and silence. He slipped between buildings, reading the battlefield, measuring distance, sensing rhythm. His gift was not only combat, but foresight, the ability to bend terrain and fear into weapons. He spoke to the men of Grafton, not with loud orders, but with urgent, controlled words. He pointed to cover, to rooftops, to broken wagons that could become barricades. He urged them to defend their families, their homes, their lives. Watching him, Kalira Vaughn felt something unfamiliar ignite within her. She stepped forward. Her voice, once sharp with contempt, now carried command. "Listen to him," Kalira Vaughn shouted. "He saved us before. He'll do it again." Her words pierced the panic. Memory gave them strength. Slowly, hesitant men began to move. Fear turned into action. Disorder became resistance. They followed ORU. The clash was brutal. The cross riders, expecting an easy conquest, collided with an untrained but desperate defense. Despite his wound, ORU fought with disciplined precision, disarming, disabling, striking only when necessary. He taught the townsfolk not heroism, but survival. Throw dust, break lines, use tools as weapons, fight not with courage, but with instinct. Then the moment came. Through the smoke, Niall Cross faced him directly. Her eyes were cold, her lips curled in disdain.
"So you're the Apache ghost," she said, raising her pistols. "Let's see if ghosts bleed." 2 shots cracked through the air. ORU, anticipating the strike, dropped to one knee. The bullets tore past him. Before she could fire again, he flicked a sharp fragment of stone. It struck her hand with ruthless accuracy. She cried out, her grip breaking, her aim lost. He stepped forward. But suddenly a figure burst from the smoke. It was Drevin Cole. His hands were no longer bound.
His face was grim, his eyes burning with fury and desperation. Somehow he had escaped confinement. "Oru!" Drevin Cole shouted, his voice raw. "Leave her! This isn't her fault!" The moment froze. The outlaw who had terrorized Grafton now stood between his brother and the woman he had led into battle. Shock rippled through the street. For a brief instant, Niall Cross's expression softened. Something flickered in her eyes, something beyond alliance. With a sudden move, Drevin Cole lunged, pulling her away from ORU's strike. A blade grazed his side instead, the blow meant for her. The battle stalled. Reality shifted. The true nature of the assault began to emerge. Bleeding, breathing hard, Drevin Cole looked at ORU, his voice breaking. "She's my wife, brother," he said, the words tumbling out. "And this is her revenge." He pointed toward the Vaughn estate. "For what your woman did to our people. To our child." The words struck ORU like a blow to the chest. A wife, a child. This was not greed, not chaos, not banditry. This was vengeance. A wound carved deep into blood and memory. Niall Cross was no mere outlaw leader. She was bound to Drevin Cole by marriage, by loss, by fury. The attack was not random, it was personal, and the truth was far more dangerous than bullets. ORU stood motionless, caught between loyalty and duty, between brotherhood and justice. Protect Grafton, or face the pain his own blood carried. He turned toward Kalira Vaughn. Her face mirrored his confusion. Then he looked back at Drevin Cole, whose eyes pleaded not for mercy, but for understanding. In that moment, ORU knew he could not simply defeat them. He had to uncover the truth, even if it meant risking everything. Slowly, deliberately, he released his grip on his knife. It fell to the ground with a dull sound. A signal, not of surrender, but of a choice. But his choice was not only courage. It was a terrifying surrender of protection. The guardian of Grafton had willingly exposed himself, wagering his life on a single fragile moment of trust. The sound of ORU's knife striking the dirt rang through the street like a verdict. The chaos stopped. Gunfire faded. Shouts died. Both the townspeople and the cross riders froze, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Weapons lowered, breath held. An Apache warrior, feared, hunted, legendary, had laid down his weapon before a force that could easily destroy him. Behind a shattered wagon, Kalira Vaughn gasped. She understood the magnitude of his act. He had stepped into uncertainty with nothing but faith. Her heart thundered with fear for his life and something deeper,
a growing awareness of the moral strength he carried within him. Across the street, shielded by Drevin Cole, Niele Cross studied ORU with narrowed eyes. She had prepared for slaughter. She had expected violence. But this was something she had never faced. Drevin Cole, clutching the wound on his side, looked between his brother and his wife. His gaze pleaded silently with her, to pause, to listen. Slowly, Orhu lifted his empty hands. "I didn't know," he said, his voice low, yet commanding. "I didn't know about your child, about your pain." His words were not excuses. They were an invitation, a challenge. Niele Cross hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the trigger. Rage, once burning, began to tremble beneath the weight of his vulnerability and her husband's silent appeal. For the first time, she did not see an enemy. She saw a man willing to listen. Sensing her hesitation, Drevin Cole spoke through pain. "He's our brother, Niele," he said hoarsely. "My twin." He didn't know. The truth hung in the air like smoke. Shock widened Niele Cross's eyes. She looked at ORU again, really looked at him, and saw what she had missed before. The same sharp features, the same quiet intensity, the same unmistakable bloodline. The fury that had driven her began to fracture. Slowly, reluctantly, she lowered her pistols. "Years ago," she said, her voice stripped of armor, raw with grief. "Your half-sister's mother, Mora Vaughn, drove my people from our land." Her words trembled. "She used her wealth, her power. She took everything, and in that chaos, my child, our child," she corrected, glancing at Drevin Cole. "He was lost, taken. We thought he was dead." From behind the barricade, Kalira Vaughn felt ice settle in her chest. Her mother, the woman she had worshipped, the legacy she had inherited, all of it was built on cruelty. The Vaughn fortune was stained with blood, her pride shattered. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "It was my mother," Kalira Vaughn said. I didn't know." Niele Cross looked at her, not with hatred now, but with something quieter, something heavier. She no longer saw an arrogant heiress. She saw a woman crushed beneath the weight of truth. The real enemy, she realized, was not the people standing before her, but the legacy of greed that had poisoned generations. Stepping forward, ORU spoke again, not as a warrior, but as a man who understood pain. "The past cannot be changed," he said calmly, "but the future can." He turned to Drevin Cole, then to Niele Cross. "What brings justice?" he asked. "More blood, or something stronger?" Niele Cross looked at her exhausted riders. Their faces were no longer fierce, only confused, worn, and tired. She looked at the burning stable, the terrified townspeople, and finally at ORU, standing unarmed before her. In that moment, she understood something terrifying. The greatest defeat was not losing a battle. It was continuing a war that had already destroyed everything. Her voice softened. "Enough," she said. She turned to her gang. "We ride out. This fight ends here." The Cross Riders, stunned but obedient, began to gather their horses. Slowly, the tension drained from the street, leaving behind ashes, silence, and a truth that could no longer be buried. Bruised and exhausted, Drevin Cole lifted his gaze toward ORU, a flicker of gratitude and something deeper passing between them without words. In finding his brother, he had discovered something he had never believed possible.
a chance to step away from the road of blood and ruin. As Nielle Cross swung into her saddle, she looked back at ORU once more. Her voice was guarded, but it carried a quiet edge of truth. "You speak of justice," she said, "but what about the child, the one who vanished, and all the other children stolen by greed and power?" Her eyes held pain that no victory could erase. Then she turned her horse sharply, and with the cross riders behind her, vanished into the fading darkness of dawn. Grafton remained standing, battered but alive. The battle had ended, yet the deepest wound, the lost child of Drevin Cole and Nielle Cross, born from the sins of Mora Vaughn, remained unresolved, a silent scar etched into every life it had touched. Silence settled over Grafton, heavier than any gunshot. It was not the silence of fear, but the stillness of exhaustion, of truth laid bare. The embers of the burned stable glowed faintly beneath the pale morning sky, reminders not only of terror, but of a victory achieved not through violence, but through understanding. Among the weary townspeople, Kalira Vaughn stood motionless, the weight of her family's legacy pressed down upon her chest. Her mother's actions, the stolen land, the shattered families, the missing child, all of it echoed inside her like thunder. The fortune she had inherited no longer felt like privilege. It felt like debt. She turned her eyes toward ORU, who sat quietly nearby, tending the wound in his shoulder. His face bore the marks of battle and revelation alike. She no longer saw him as a savior, but as a man who had chosen mercy over vengeance, wisdom over rage, even when confronted with his own lost brother. In the days that followed, Grafton began to mend. Buildings were rebuilt, windows were replaced, streets were cleared. Yet the town itself was forever changed. The old hierarchy, once ruled by unquestioned wealth and status, had collapsed. The people now looked to ORU, not with fear, but with reverence. And they looked to Kalira Vaughn with something more complex: sympathy, expectation, and hope. Within her grand mansion, transformation unfolded. No longer a fortress of isolation, it became a place of quiet service. Kalira Vaughn abandoned lavish gatherings and devoted her resources to those harmed by the raid. She funded rebuilding efforts, supported displaced families, and sought dialogue with the elders of ORU's people. Her fortune, once a symbol of dominance, became an instrument of repair. She studied the history her mother had buried. She invested in schools, trade, and fair agreements with tribal communities. The coin she had once tossed in contempt now rested in her palm as a reminder of who she had been, and who she vowed never to be again. Yet ORU did not remain in Grafton. When the town was safe, he prepared to leave quietly. His wounds were not only physical. The discovery of his brother, the lost child, the tangled past, these were burdens he could not carry in silence. He knew his path lay elsewhere. At dawn, beneath a sky brushed with gold and rose, ORU mounted his horse. His saddle was light, but his spirit was heavy. At the edge of town, Kalira Vaughn waited. She offered him a purse of gold, not as payment, but as trust. He accepted it with a nod. Between them existed no grand promises, only an unspoken understanding. Years passed. Grafton flourished under a new spirit of responsibility and unity. Kalira Vaughn, once the distant heiress, became a figure of quiet respect. Her life became a bridge between settlers and tribes, her work guided by justice rather than pride. But her search never ended. Then, one afternoon, a lone rider appeared on the horizon. It was ORU. Time had carved deeper lines into his face, yet his eyes carried a calm he had never possessed before. Beside him rode a young boy, perhaps 10 years old. The child's gaze held the unmistakable intensity of ORU,
yet his features reflected Niall Cross. Behind them came two more riders, Drevin Cole and Niall Cross. Their faces were no longer hardened by hatred, but softened by years of struggle and healing. The lost child had been found, taken long ago by the Brenner family. He had grown far from the violence that had torn his parents apart. Oru, driven by purpose and truth, had spent years tracing the past, unraveling secrets, and reuniting what history had shattered. He had forged not only peace between two families, but understanding between two worlds. There was no dramatic confrontation, only quiet grace. Drevin Cole dismounted and embraced Oru in silence, two brothers standing at last on the same ground. Niall Cross offered Kalira Vaughn a faint, honest smile, a recognition of healing earned through pain. The boy ran into his parents' arms, laughter rising into the open sky. In that moment, the true shadow of the desert was revealed, not violence, but the human heart, capable of destruction and mercy alike. It was not hatred that had ruled them, but misunderstanding. And it was not power that saved them, but empathy.
In the harsh vastness of the Old West, where men often sought conquest, it was vulnerability, forgiveness, and the relentless pursuit of reconciliation that carved the deepest path toward redemption. Gold did not build the strongest empires. Family did. Forgiveness did. Hope did. And in the silent wisdom of the desert, it became clear that even the most barren land can bloom when the seeds of peace are finally planted. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.